Yeah, layman apologists, cooking the saints, cooking the coach. Ink still heavy when the page get thin. Truth don't stutter when the noise rush in. Same breath spoke the void to form. Still pressed kings in the footnotes warned. Cross wasn't drama, it was law enforced. Judgment met mercy, no appeal in court. Blood hit wood, debt got voided. Grave tried leverage, miscalculated. Stone rolled back, not for escape. Just proof death failed to seal the case. Crowns corrode, doctrines fray. Truth don't age, it outlasts decay. If it need add-ons, edict seals. That stress cracks, not hidden, depth revealed. Fire don't change, goals intent just shows what was counterfeit. Christ is king.
Truth don't flex, it calibrates. Claims fold when the pressure breaks.
Christ reigns now. Christ is king. Christ is king.
No revisions, no update. Same word judge every age.
Christ reigns now. Christ is king. Christ is king. Word still cuts through the static rings. Light don't bend for the aged meats. Christ reigns now. Christ is king. Christ is king. Long stay sealed, no in between. All things weighed when the balance swings. Christ reigns now. Christ is king. Once delivered, never patched. No late scroll slid through the latch. If your gospel need human glue, you telling me the cross came up short for you. Sheep hear voice through signal jam. Gold don't fear the program scan. Light don't argue, don't persuade. Just step in, let the false decay. Gold plates bend, black stones mute. Added books can't hold the truth. Scales come out, myths go thin. Truth one piece, not discipline dependent. If it fractures under open sight, that ain't mystery, it lacks spine. Same word held when Rome pressed steel. Still standing when the empire kneels.
Truth don't flex, it calibrates. Claims fold when the pressure breaks.
Christ reigns now. Christ is king. Christ is king.
Every lie got a shelf life day. Read it clean, don't complicate.
Christ reigns now. Christ is king. Christ is king. Word still cuts through the static rings. Light don't bend for the aged meats. Christ reigns now. Christ is king. Christ is king. Throne stay sealed, no in between. All things weighed when the balance swings. Christ reigns now. Christ is king. Alpha framed it, Omega closed. End declared before it showed. Kings play chess inside of time. Christ author, every moving line. Not elected, not sustained. Crown predated, cause and claim. Not propped up by our defense. Truth stand firm without our breath. Wrath exhausted, grace intact. Paid in full, ain't future.
Hello, everyone. Let me know if you can hear me. I see Mr. Onion Lover is in the chat already. Now, do not judge me, folks. I'm enjoying a pumpkin spice tea. Never thought I would be a pumpkin spice guy, but it actually tastes kind of nice. Anyway, let me know how the sound is. I currently have a new setup. The mic seemed to work well last time me and Gabe streamed, but midway through it had a little bit of a technical problem. So let me know if it's too loud, if it's got an echo or anything, so you can let me know. Mr. Onion Lover says he can in fact hear me. Well, that's always a good sound. A good sound, a good sight. I normally end up starting these lives not being unmuted. Soccerfoot says, "Hey all, welcome my friend. How are you over on Twitch? Good to see you." Onion Lover says, "Pumpkin spice is great for baking. It's apparently great in coffee and tea as well." I don't know how I got converted onto this. I'm going to blame members of my family, but so folks, today we are testing out a couple of things. I have upgraded my plan in EV Mux. You will see the change probably towards the end of the weekend, or not this weekend, next weekend. I should say we should have a lot more features We've got our live show coming up where Muslims can call in. And more importantly, we do have a debate coming up. However, I still need to lock down a debater on the negative side. So we will hear more about that information later on. Today, we're going to react to Apostate Prophet's story about coming out of Islam. So this is going to be a very chilled stream, a very relaxed stream. We're just going to really watch. I'll give my thoughts here and there. But if you guys want to comment or chat, you can obviously do that, and I will try my best to get to your chats. Mr. Onion Lover. My family were using pumpkin spice for making cakes and muffins before the pumpkin spice latte trend took off. It's fantastic. Yeah, I'm not much of a trend person, Mr. Onion Lover, but this was made for me a couple of weeks ago, and ever since I've just been drinking it. Tina, sister, how are you? I will be in touch later tonight, by the way, to get you sorted out with your information. Good to see you. Right, folks, I am going to go on ahead and bring this up first. Let me see. Okay, there we go. Folks, you can let me know whether this format works or not. Let me know if the YouTube video is too loud, but I haven't actually watched this yet, and I'm quite interested in watching it, and I have a couple of things I want to try out with this new setup. I'm trying to get the setup behind me looking a little bit nicer, just so streams don't look as bare bones as they used to. Obviously, we've got the new mic setup, we've got new monitors, everything else. We're trying to upgrade our quality for streams going forward, so that whenever we do start doing a lot of these call-in shows, that people are actually going to be seeing not just good quality conversations happen, but they're not just going to be looking at a bare bones setup of me sitting with a blank wall behind me, which is, nobody wants to tune in and see that. So, folks, I'm going to go ahead and react to this. This is a very chill stream. I will not be bringing up anyone to chat. This is just going to be me hanging out. Looking forward to having a conversation with you guys in the chat, though, so please do interact. I look forward to hearing your thoughts, but I'm going to go ahead and press play, and I'm going to react to this a little bit back and forth. YouTube, once again, Apostate Prophet does not strike anyone for using his material. I know this is from Frank Turek. I also believe he doesn't strike anybody. I am reacting to this under fair use copyright. So do not strike me again. Anyway, folks, let's go ahead and play, and let me know what your thoughts are.
I have a lot of grievances about being raised in a Muslim family, but I've always had love for my parents, and especially my mother, and her feelings. It was very difficult for me to actually break it to them that I left Islam.
My father has cut all ties with me. He said, under these circumstances, you cannot be our son anymore, and you have to change your ways, otherwise you're basically dead for us. So I have since not talked to my father. I occasionally talk to my mother, but our relationship is very strained since then. But this is nothing, because I have met a lot of Muslims along the way, or a lot of ex-Muslims along the way, who left Islam and who are now under constant threat from their families. There are other ex-Muslims that I know of who are in hiding, who had to leave entire countries, who were chased with threats of death by their fathers and their brothers and cousins and relatives.
So, let me just pause here and react briefly, because I will have to stop this every now and again because it's YouTube. This is not unique to Apostate Prophet here. We reacted to a video before December, anyway, about a young woman who was unalived in an unaliving. I need to be very careful with my words here on censorship. This is common within Islam. If you leave Islam, you are considered under the unaliving penalty. So this threat is not unique to Ridvan. Many have faced this. Many apostates from Islam speak out about this. And I think it's good that they do. That's why I'm interested in hearing this story a lot more. But this is very, very common. So in Islam, you can be unalived for being an apostate or for being a critic of Islam. So technically, I would be considered ripe for the unaliving. But we have to speak out against cults. We owe our allegiance to the Lord Jesus Christ. And this is what we're going to do. But anyway, let's continue watching.
Who are being persecuted by their governments that they lived under. So it is a very difficult thing to be an ex-Muslim.
Ladies and gentlemen, how does a Muslim man who spent much of his upbringing in the country of Turkey actually put himself at great risk to leave Islam, and then not only leave Islam, but become an atheist, and then after some time being an atheist, become a Christian? How does this?
So yeah, for those that don't know, this is actually Ridvan's story. He was a Muslim for many years of his life, and then he became an atheist for over a decade. And ever since he started working with David Wood and other people, many people were praying that Ridvan would come to Christ. That he would see that he was. I'm sure he'll probably tell his story on this, but he will probably. He'll probably get into the fact that he was very burned out on any thought of religion whatsoever. So a couple of years ago, whenever you were watching his lives with David Wood and stuff, like, you could see he was still very hostile to religion and stuff. Over this last number of years, that has changed, and Ridvan has actually come to faith in Christ. So we praise the Lord for that. So Soccerfoot says, anyone else having trouble signing in to the members only on Fourth Wall? I get the page doesn't exist for the login. Okay, brother. Thanks for letting me know that. I will get in touch with Gabe. He takes care of the technical side for me. So if there's something up there, we'll find out what it is and get it sorted for you. So, but anyway, let's get back to the video. And folks, I do apologize about constantly stopping, but this is just YouTube's silly rules. If I don't comment every whatever number of seconds, it's ridiculous and arbitrary.
Happen? Why was he a Muslim? Why did he leave Islam for atheism? And why did he leave atheism for Christianity? I don't know if we'll get to all that tonight or today, but I'm talking to Ridvan Adamir, who's also known as the Apostate Prophet. Anyone with the name Apostate Prophet certainly gets a round of applause, because there's a lot of people booing him over there in the Islamic world. But here he is, ladies and gentlemen. Ridvan, we have just met a couple of times. I saw you briefly at Charlie's Memorial. You were on a show with Charlie last July, which is a great program we'll put in the show notes. But why don't you give our viewers and listeners kind of an overview of your life and how you got to where you are now?
Sure, thank you. Before I start, it's a great pleasure to sit down with you and talk with you, Frank. I have a lot of love for you, and I hope that we work together again, or more in the future. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, I did tell my story a little bit to Charlie. It was very kind of him to simply reach out to me one day out of the blue and to say, hey, I want to know more about you and all that. And I would like you to come and tell me your story. And he was kind enough to invite me there. And I got to, even for a very short time, meet that wonderful person that he was. So just want to remember that. But yeah.
And I think it's important to remind people that the tragedy that happened, Charlie Kirk, as tragic as it was and is, we've seen an awful lot of good come from that situation. We've seen an awful lot of people realize their need for God, and we've seen people turn towards Christ during that. And it's still ongoing. Like, there's reports of many churches, not just in America, but even over here in Ireland, of people flooding to churches and saying, look, I've been out of church too long. I've never been to church before. Many are coming to Christ. And we want to see that continue. We want to see that flourish. So, like, guys like Ridvan, guys like David Wood, Inspiring Philosophy, God Logic, Fearless Truth, If you don't know who they are, go and get involved with them. Go and follow them over on YouTube, follow them on X, support the work they're doing, because they are showing people that the Christian faith is defensible, that we have reasons for the hope that is within us. And more importantly, they're exposing Islam.
So I am of Turkish origin. My name is Ridvan Aydemir. I sarcastically, satirically call myself apostate prophet because apostasy is a very, very difficult thing in Islam. When people, leave different religions, they usually do not refer to themselves as ex whatever religion. When people leave Islam, they have a tendency to use the label ex-Muslim for themselves because they want to engage in activism, because it is a very important thing. Because leaving Islam is not just something that is frowned upon. You are not just shunned; you are also threatened. I was threatened like that. I grew up as a Turkish Muslim in a.
That's the thing, folks. You will be not only threatened, you will be shunned from your family. Certain families commit honor unalivings. There's nothing honorable about it. But there was a post I seen today on X that I couldn't amen enough, and it basically said that if that law in Sharia didn't exist, that if you weren't unalived for apostasy, Islam would be bleeding out numbers worse than it currently is. Dawa guys like to turn around and say, oh, it's the fastest growing religion in the world. Yeah, because of birth rates. But the apostasy numbers, it's bad. Even the sheikhs, even the Dawa guys all admit it. Islam is bleeding out bad.
In a Turkish Muslim family. I actually initially grew up in Germany, where I was born, and lived there for 15 years until I eventually had to move to Turkey with my parents because they wanted to live in a Muslim country. At least they were consistent, unlike many other immigrants. I can give them that. Through my struggles, through my early life, began exploring different ideas, and eventually found myself becoming very close to the religious Islamic ideas that my parents always taught me from very early on. So I began practicing and following Islam very strictly for many years. But during those years, I had a lot of questions about.
And this is key, because this is something that gets thrown at AP a lot. Muslims who are critical of AP like to point and say, oh, he wasn't really a Muslim, he never followed the faith. Do you ever notice this is always what happens whenever you engage with Islam? No matter what it is, you could point to a hadith. Oh, you don't know the context. You could point to a surah in the Quran. Oh, you don't speak Arabic. Someone's an ex-Muslim. Oh, they weren't really a Muslim. This is the constant cope that these guys do over and over and over. I had an interaction yesterday with a Muslim on X, and again, this is not all Muslims, but unfortunately, it is by and far the majority of them. But I had an interaction with a guy the other day on X where I consistently showed him that what he was espousing was not only false, but like he had everything backwards. By the end of the conversation, the guy basically just doubled down and he was like, yeah, thank you for confirming that I'm right. Now, without a shadow of a doubt, and I'm not just saying this because I'm biased to the situation, anyone that's seen the interaction saw it and was like, okay, yeah, he's been presented with evidence to the contrary of his opinion, and he's what he's espousing has been exposed. The guy comes to the end of it and he's like, yeah, thank you, I won. This is the Muslim mindset. They either it's a breakdown in logic for them, or they do not they just cannot comprehend what's being said, which in a lot of cases is probably key. But for others, it's just this mentality: if I can't admit I'm wrong, I can't show weakness. It's such working with them is incredibly difficult. That's all I'll say.
The Quran, which I sat down and read several times. I read it once, it was very confusing. I read it twice, I had more questions. When I read it the third time, it was over. There was just no way back. Because this book that I was taught to believe in, that I was raised with.
Again, apologies for all the pausing. But If I'm now through my second read through of the Quran, I am going to read it again, and then I'm going to read it again, and then I'm going to read it again. Not because it's an enjoyable book; it genuinely is. I did a quick review of it the other day. All apologetics aside, all polemics, all bias from me as a Christian, just reading that as a religious text, it was painful. It's incredibly dull. It's incredibly disjointed. You're here one minute, you're over there the next. It's truly a hard read, not because it's hard to comprehend. It's just incredibly dull, dry, and the challenge, oh, produce a verse or a surah like it. Anybody that reads the Quran and honestly thinks that it's beautiful, I don't know.
that my family was all about turned out to be a very ignorant book, a religion or a religious scripture that seems to be a product of simple and pure ignorance in 7th century Arabia. There is a difference between the Bible and the Quran. For example, the Quran is, as we know, a collection of scripture that is just so rich, that is so ahead of its time. I always give the example of Ecclesiastes, which was my favorite book even when I was an atheist. And I've always considered it very, very much ahead of its time.
The Bible, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, the Bible. So Ecclesiastes was, I specifically thought was very, very
Now that's interesting. He said that even as an atheist. That's telling.
much ahead of its time. The Quran, in comparison, doesn't have anything like that. You know, the Quran is a book that is not rich, that is not full of wisdom, that does not have history, that doesn't teach you much, and that is simply the collection of crazy ramblings by a 7th century merchant and turned.
And again, whether people like this or not, if you read the Quran for yourself, you will see that it cannot stand on its own two legs. It genuinely can't. It makes constant assumptions that you know the biblical narrative because it relies on our Bible. That's the thing. So time and time again, if you only had the Quran, you would be left with a million questions. What is Adam's wife called? Well, the Quran never tells you. What's Adam's children called? Well, the Quran never tells you. I could point to many, many more details where you would be like, well, who's this talking about? Who's this? How do you know the name for this person? The thing is, they don't unless they appeal to her Bible, which again, the Quran itself affirms the Torah. It affirms the Injil. This idea that, her scriptures were corrupted, you don't find that idea in the Quran itself, but where you do find it is later Islamic theology. Because whenever they finally realized, oh, wait, this contradicts, they realized, dear, we have a problem. So what do we now have to say? The Torah and the Injil, they were lost.
Warlord, actually. So when I realized that this book was full of ignorance, including about the world around us, about creation, about the sky and the sun and the stars and all that, it was very difficult to me to hold on to it. On top of that, the Quran also teaches so much hate. When I grew up, I was taught to hate by my parents, primarily the Jews, but then also the Christians that we lived around, and all other disbelievers. And it wasn't a big surprise. When I read the Quran for the first time, I realized that is where everything comes from. The Quran is very hostile. It already starts in a very hostile way.
It is.
About how
Now,
this
if I
is the
talk
one
during
true
this,
book
can
and
you
all
guys hear
those who
me?
reject it are sick in their hearts and all that. So it teaches hate, hate, and hate, and contradicts so much with the Bible in things that it is supposed to be consistent on. So
I'll try
at
not to
some
do it too
point,
much, but
as I
it's easier
continued
than pausing.
questioning, I ended up leaving Islam, which I'm really dumbing down right now. It was actually a very, very long process and very complicated and very, very difficult, a very difficult step to make. But one day I did tell myself, I simply don't believe in it anymore. And I actually said it out loud to myself. I am no longer a Muslim. I no longer believe in Allah. I don't believe in Islam anymore. And that's where I left.
Was there a tipping point? Was there something you discovered that you said, this just can't be true?
There was one specific story. So I talked about the sun and stars and sky and all that. And the Quran, of course, does have these, although Muslims often claim that it is a book of science and not of science, the Quran clearly applies to.
And by the way, folks, I know I said I would talk a little bit over this, but I'm going to pause it every now and again. The claim that Muslims used to make that the Quran is a book of science, the most popular Dawa guys have all abandoned that claim because they've even admitted it in their videos. You can go check it out. You can go search Ali Dawa and Quran scientific claims. Ali Dawa used to use the argument all the time that the Quran is a book full of scientific claims and they couldn't know it otherwise. You know, that proves that it's from Allah. They have since abandoned that argument because of how many errors that have been found scientifically. So the interesting thing is they have abandoned that claim now because they know it doesn't work. But here's how dishonest they are. They will still use that claim around people they know will not go and check out this information themselves. So when you encounter a lot of Muslims and they say to you as a Christian, oh, our book has, you know, scientific wonders in it, like how could Muhammad have known this? How could anyone have known this unless it came from God? Be aware that that person may not be trying to be ingenuine. That person may just have been told a lie. And that's the sad thing. Anyway, let me address a few comments here. LA Apologetics, good to see you, brother. Good to see you. And he says, thanks for the mod honor, brother. No problem, brother. I just realized the other day, I think you had gone by that stage, but I realized you couldn't post the link. So we do have a couple of spots open, folks. If anybody does want to be a mod, like I kind of need to know you a little bit to know that I can trust you. But if anybody does want to be a mod, you're free to do so. Anyway, again, I'm going to continue to play this. I may chat over it a little bit rather than keep constantly pausing, but let me know if it becomes, you know, to a point where it's not really listenable.
Science to the natural world around us in order to prove the point that the author is Allah. It says, and look at the sky, does it have any cracks? In order to prove that it is Allah who made it and who wrote it. But there is one section
That's profound, right?
in the Quran, which is a very interesting one in chapter 18. It tells a story of a man known as the two-horned one, who walked to the farthest side in the east and saw the sun rising upon people who didn't have any protection against it, and he built for them a wall. Then he traveled to the farthest west, where he eventually found the sun as it was setting in a murky, muddy spring. That's what he observed. When I read this, I was very confused about it, and
I would say so.
I asked imams and I asked others to answer this question, and the answers that they gave were simply very insufficient. As I questioned it further, I then found out that this story is actually directly taken because somebody came to Muhammad and asked him about somebody named Dhul Qarnayn, the two-horned one, and he apparently didn't know. So he went and found something out and came back. And
So just before Ridvan goes on here, this is what I want you guys to know. Muhammad was known as the ear. And the reason he was known as the ear was he picked up whatever was told to him. Didn't matter what source it came from, Muhammad picked it up and retold it. And there was a sect of Jews who pretty much, you know, fed Muhammad lies just to see if he would repeat it. And sure enough, Muhammad repeats it and claims it was revelation. So this is an example of what Ridvan is pointing out. Muhammad hears the story, doesn't know much about it, goes away and basically tells it.
story that he tells here is actually a parallel of a myth about Alexander the Great that people told back in the day from these mythical stories about him called the Alexander Romance, where he allegedly also went to the east and built a big wall and then went to the very, very far west and all that, and built a wall against Gog and Magog that will come and attack the world and all that. So it's a story that he directly took from folk legends about Alexander the Great. And it was very strange for me to find that out because the two-horned one in the Quran is praised as a servant of Allah who is righteous and who is guided by Allah Alexander the Great was as pagan as it gets. He declared himself God.
Yep.
Um,
Alexander the Great
he's
didn't believe in a god. He
and
thought he was
the whole
a god.
description of the Quran sinking in a muddy spring, I tried to, as much as I could, interpret that, metaphorically and all that, which is what Muslims nowadays try to do. But there simply is no metaphor. He goes and he sees the sun setting in a murky spring. And when we go to the earliest sources, the earliest interpretations and explanations of the Quran, we find that the earliest scholars and interpreters, such as Tabari, who is an early interpreter of the Quran, was not arguing that this is a metaphorical explanation, but rather that there is actually such a place where the sun goes at night to set in a muddy spring. And then the discussion that he has is only about whether it's a muddy spring, a dark spring, a murky spring, and all that. So
Now, pay attention to what AP just said. Al-Tabari, one of the earliest to talk about this in the Hadith, he says that this is not metaphorical, that this did actually take place, that there is a place where the sun sets in a murky spring. Yet, whenever we bring this up to Muslims, this is what I say about the Muslim shuffle. Watch it turn into, you don't know the context, you don't know the Hadith, you don't speak the Arabic. It's anything to hopscotch away from the actual point.
it turned out that the Quran appeals to a very ignorant environment, a very uninformed, unenlightened world where people in the 7th century simply have these fantasies about the world and don't actually know anything about how it was created and what it looks like. So, and the Quran, which is claimed to be Allah's word, directly affirms those mythical perspectives. So
we have a lot more with the Apostate Prophet. You want to check his YouTube channel out. Look for Apostate Prophet. In fact, he's got one YouTube video up there, 43 scientific mistakes in the Quran. It's got 800,000 views. Check that out. That's one of them, the sun setting in a muddy spring. We'll talk a lot more with Apostate Prophet after the break. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist.
I ain't going anywhere, brother.
How would you like to be known as the Apostate Prophet from Islam? Sounds like a dangerous life. Well, it is. My guest today is the Apostate Prophet, and his YouTube channel, Apostate Prophet, you can see has some amazing videos on it that will help you understand the second largest religion in the world. And he came out of that religion, became an atheist, then became a Christian. We're just talking about that process here on I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, which is on the American Family Radio Network and several other stations around the country. I'm Frank Turek.
Frank,
Apostate.
killing me, man. Get to the interview.
Yes. That's not his first name, but I kind of like that. Hey, Apostate. Hey, Ridvan.
LA, no doubt, no doubt.
So
people just say AP sometimes. So
yes, yeah. AP. We call you AP. Yeah, okay. So you decide as you read the Quran just cannot be true. How old are you at the time, and how do you break this to your parents, and then what happens?
It's very difficult for me to remember what year something was and how old I was in that year, because I often forget what my birthday actually is and how old I am. But but I think it was, I'm pretty sure that it was around the year 2012.
Okay.
That's when I was about 21 years old or something like that. 2013 was actually when I made a decision. No, that's true. When I made the decision to leave Islam completely behind. Then a year after that, I was still questioning faith and all that. The thing is, I didn't really tell my parents at first. My parents found it very fascinating and they were very happy about the fact that I would, before that time, sit down and pray and try to be a good Muslim and all that, because that was the most important thing to my parents. They would really like to see me be a good Muslim.
Yeah.
So they found great joy in that.
If I
cared a lot about how my mother felt. I cared a lot about her happiness. I have a lot of grievances about being raised in a Muslim family, but I've always had love for my parents and especially my mother and her feelings. It was very difficult for me to actually break it to them that I left Islam. So what I actually did was to not tell them, but to kind of make it obvious that I'm not really practicing anymore, which made them a little bit upset, but to rather start speaking online about it.
Oh, Yeah, that's a rough one. I don't even know because obviously we're not really raised in a culture like in Christianity. I have no fear now. Heaven forbid, I have no desire to apostatize from Christianity, but we don't live under this fear, this threat that if you were to apostatize, that your life becomes forfeit. We don't live in a culture where imagine trying to tell your parents that you'd left this religion knowing that they are going to not only forsake you, but you know, there's every possibility that they may attempt an honor unaliving. So I can understand Ridvan not quite getting around to telling them, but instead trying to make it obvious that he's not really practicing and then speaking out about it online. This is the one thing that people will notice about Ridvan over and over and over. You say what you want about this dude. This dude has cojones. Like he just straight up does. He has no fear of the threats, and he's lived with many threats now over the years. And especially since he started working with David Wood, I think they've only increased.
Excuse me. And that eventually led them to find out from other people who saw me online that I had left Islam and that I'm also now criticizing Islam. In retrospect, it probably wasn't really a good idea to do it this way because it was probably more hurtful. But of course, they're very upset about it. They don't like it. My father has cut all ties with me, and he said to me only in a text message the last time that I saw him, or after I saw him, he said, "Under these circumstances, you cannot be our son anymore, and you have to change your ways. Otherwise, you're basically dead for us." So, I have since not talked to my father. I occasionally talk to my mother, but our relationship is very strained since then. But this is nothing because I have met a lot of Muslims along the way, or a lot of ex-Muslims along the way who left Islam and who are now under constant threat from their families. Gladly, my family didn't tend to be, or doesn't tend to be, a very violent one. There are other ex-Muslims that I know of who are in hiding, who had to leave entire countries, who were chased with threats of death by their fathers and their brothers and cousins and relatives, who are being persecuted by their governments that they lived under. So it is a very difficult thing to be an ex-Muslim. Nowadays, for me, when I speak out, I do constantly get death threats. Sometimes it's just talk. Sometimes it seems more credible. Gladly, I am in the United States of America where we have our freedoms guaranteed. So the FBI checks in on me and also tells me that I shouldn't be intimidated by anybody, that I'm free to do whatever I want to do, and that I should simply stay strong and keep going. People in Europe, for example, don't have the support of their own governments and security forces. Gladly, we do. But yeah, so leaving Islam is a dangerous path. In multiple countries, there is still a death penalty for it. In other countries, you can be locked up and fined for it and lose your family and all your belongings for it. And even if the governments don't do anything, people are always there wanting to harm you and to kill you. So it's pretty bad.
Now, this is right from Surah 3, if I'm not mistaken, is it not?
Well, there are many parts in the Quran that do instruct Muslims to be harsh and to fight and to be harsh toward those also who turn away from the faith. It actually more precisely the hadith, the traditions, the narrations that go back to Muhammad. Because so in Islam, the Quran is not the sole source of rulings and morality.
Which, by the way, folks, let me just point this out because Muslims love saying, "Oh, the Gospels are anonymous." Flip that standard back on the Hadith. They were collected a long time after Muhammad's death. There's the chains themselves are disputed because this guy he wasn't reliable. He was weak. This guy, oh, we don't know about him. He was unreliable. Their entire Hadith system, and this is why they chop and change this all the time, even on Sunnah.com. About a year ago, we were going through some of the Hadith, only to find that they had changed the strength of certain Hadith because it was being used against them. And because Christian apologists were using the Hadith against them, they changed the strength of the narration, so they were able to say, that's not a strong Hadith, that's a weak Hadith. So, whenever they would try and apply this standard of, oh, the Gospels are anonymous, no, we know who wrote the Gospels because the church has been reliable in keeping that record. They don't have any such thing for their Hadith. It's often by anonymous guys who weren't even companions of the Prophet. There's no relation to being the companions of the Prophet. They'll just try and claim family lines, but it's ridiculous.
And information and all that. The hadith, the narrations about things that Muhammad did and said are on the second place, if not directly equal, if they are authenticated. So Muhammad did say, according to authentic or Islamically authentic reports, whoever changes his religion, kill him. According to other narrations, he said that that no Muslim can be killed unless he commits adultery, murder, or he leaves Islam, for example. So these are not disputed. Because of these rulings, because of these commands by Muhammad, Muslims have for 1,400 years held that it's the right thing to do to persecute and to kill apostates.
Yes. And this is why whenever people try and do the whole that's not Islam, that's extremism, no. Because these are things that the Prophet Muhammad did himself. He not only instructed them, but he did them. So to say that they're not true Islam, or you appeal to groups like, and I'm hesitant about saying their name because I know what YouTube is like, but I think we all know of certain Islamic terror groups, and I'm air quoting terror because there's no need to put that label on it. They're just practicing Islam. Um, you will get people that try and say, oh, moderate Muslims denounce that. Well, they can't, because in order to denounce that, they would be denouncing their prophet and things that he did and things that he said. This is what Ridvan's pointing out. You can't escape this. So whenever people do this whole, Islam is the religion of peace, you're parroting a line that you have been fed. Go read the sources for yourself and stop listening whenever Muslims do this whole, oh, you don't speak Arabic, you don't know the context, blah, 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 blah. There's a reason they're going to tell you you don't know the context. They do not want you studying their sources.
All the legal schools of Islamic jurisprudence agree on this. They only agree on how the execution should be done, whether the apostate should be given a chance to return or not. And they all agree that if the apostate has spoken out and waged war verbally or otherwise against Islam, then there is no redemption anymore. That person needs to be executed. So these are very direct Islamic rulings.
But we're told that Islam is the religion of peace. How does this square with this kind of
it doesn't.
This kind of thinking here, AP?
So the funny thing is that a lot of people also add to that Islam directly means peace, and Islam actually doesn't mean peace. It means submission.
That's right.
It means direct submission to not only Allah, the creator, but also to Muhammad.
Yep.
Because the Quran doesn't simply put Allah as the one that people need to submit to as authority. It also puts the Muhammad as the secondary authority. Everybody who listens to Allah also needs to listen to Muhammad. In order to enter Islam, you have to say, I testify there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. So you submit fully to Allah and his so-called messenger. And Allah and his so-called messenger order violence and persecution. You can, of course, have peace if you fully abide by Islam's brutal laws. And of course, if you refuse to do that, you can die and rest in peace. But that's all the peace there is to it, unfortunately.
Yes. And unfortunately, people in the West here want to play footsie with this kind of thing. And
that's the danger.
They don't seem to realize that this kind of violence has been going on for 1,400 years.
Precisely.
Very prevalent over here
from
in Ireland.
Muhammad
People try and say, "Oh,
right up to today."
Muslims, they're peaceful.
So you have to have a lot of courage to do what
Muhammad
you're
was
doing.
peaceful when he
Let
was
me
in
ask
the
you a
minority.
question that I asked some Muslims when I was in Saudi Arabia and Egypt. So, and a question I ask any non-Christian here. The question is, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And sometimes with Muslims, I say, if Jesus really rose from the dead to prove he was God, would you follow him? And I asked a couple of Muslims that on my recent trip, and they both said they would. If you were to ask that question to your parents, what do you think they would say?
If Jesus rose from the dead, would you follow him? That's the question, right?
Yeah. If Jesus really rose from the dead to prove he was God, would you follow him?
Would you follow him? I wonder as well, now I'm being put on the spot here, but I wonder as well what my parents would say. I'm really curious about that as well. I think if I asked this question to my parents, they would simply refuse to answer and would probably get angry about it. But in all honesty, I really wonder. They normally would think that they should follow him and that they should become Christians, but something would probably kick in and they would refuse that. But if they came to believe it, they would have to follow Christianity and would have to leave Islam behind, because Islam is not compatible with Christianity. Islam is directly in contradiction with Christianity, and the Quran directly says that Jesus did not die, that he was not killed, not crucified, and that that Christianity is false, and that Jesus is not God, and that all those who say that Jesus is God will go to hell and stay there forever. So the Quran is actually very, very clear on that.
And this is why Islam.
But that is a very, very interesting question. I want to go back to one thing that you said. So in the West, people have this false impression that Islam is a religion of peace. Unfortunately, one of the main people who are a factor who created this is George W. Bush after 9/11. 9/11 was a terrible event. In the aftermath, in order to calm down the masses and prevent them from attacking Muslims or something like that, he went out and he actually said the phrase, "Islam is not about Islam. Islam is a religion of peace." He very much popularized this, and people picked it up and make that ridiculous claim. Throughout the 1,400 years, Muslims never claimed that Islam is a religion of peace. As I grew up, I never heard from Muslims or from my parents or from anyone else that it's a religion of peace, because it's a ridiculous claim. It is a false claim, popularized actually by some Muslim organizations in the 1960s and later on, but then very much popularized by George W. Bush, unfortunately, and picked up in the Western world. But people really need to let go of this. Islam invaded and attacked the West for 1,400 years relentlessly. It certainly is not a religion of peace.
Yeah, there is a myth in our country about that. And unfortunately, many people now believe it. And
it's not just
they're
in
letting
America,
their
folks.
guard down.
It's all Western countries.
But I want to talk about, and we'll talk about this after the break in more detail, but I want you to introduce it right now, AP, if you could. And this is the one thing that I find helpful, and I know you and David Wood and others find helpful. If you just have a short conversation with a Muslim, to plant a seed in that Muslim is something called the Islamic dilemma. Can you just start talking about that? We got about a minute before the break, and then we'll pick it up on the other side.
Yeah, so the Islamic dilemma is a very, very nice concept and an irrefutable,
good to see
fantastic
you, bro.
argument.
You can
actually,
jump up if you want, brother. I don't know if you're free or not.
I will butcher if I try to explain it very well, but it goes something like that the Quran directly affirms that the previous scriptures, the Gospel and the Torah, were revealed by Allah and are still available in the hands of the Jews and the Christians. So it said this in the 7th century, but the Torah and the Gospel, if read, are in direct contradiction with Islam and actually refute Islam and show us that Christianity is true. So if Muslims do agree indeed with their own Quran that the Gospel is a scripture by Allah, then they have to affirm that Christianity is true and that Islam is false, which is why they somehow have to reinterpret what the Quran actually says about these books. But then they have to go to the Quran and pick out passages which contradict them completely. So it's an argument that is airtight.
And we'll unpack it more right after the break. I actually asked that of a guide I had in Saudi Arabia, the Islamic dilemma. I'll tell you what he said, and then we'll go further with it, how you can use it by just asking a couple of questions of anybody you know who is a Muslim.
Radio music.
And they might not come to the foot of the cross, obviously, immediately, but it will plant a seed of doubt about the Quran and Islam in their minds.
This is the thing.
That's what you can do in our first evangelize. All right, back in
we are only going to focus on the Quran, not the tafsirs, not the hadith, nothing else, only the Quran. What is the
Students
Quran
across America are more open to the truth of Christianity than ever before. And Dr. Frank Turek is taking the powerful evidence for God to campuses like UC Berkeley, the University of Georgia, Ohio State, and Alabama, reaching thousands in person and millions more online. But every
show notes as well, so you can see it in detail. When I used this on a Saudi Arabian guide, I asked him, okay, here's where the Quran says, it's in Surah 5, verse 68 or so. It says, oh, you people of the book, you have no ground to stand on unless you stand on the law and the Gospels. It's basically saying you got to obey the Old Testament and the New Testament. But then in the previous chapter, Surah 4, chapter 4, it says Jesus never died, so he couldn't have risen from the dead. Yet the Bible says he did die and rise from the dead. So if the Quran is telling us to obey the Bible, they appear to be caught in a dilemma because it says obey the Bible, but it also contradicts what the Bible says.
But because
so if the Bible actually is true, the Quran is false. If the Bible is false, the Quran is still false because it's telling you to obey a false book. So I asked him this, AP, and I said, how do you interpret 5 and 6? He said, well, or chapter 5, verse 68, he said, well, we have to obey most of it. That's what he said. Not all of it. What kind of responses have you gotten from Muslims on this?
It is really incredible because I would also most definitely, I think David Wood has become the primary voice, the primary person, the primary figure who now has a whole project going on about the Islamic dilemma, and he's doing a fantastic job.
He has, by the way, the Islamic dilemma is airtight. Muslims think they can solve it. They can't, because no matter what direction you go in, you end up proving Islam false. Now, there are different versions of the Islamic dilemma. I actually have one of my own, and it's called the prophetic veracity test, right? Go on to my channel after watching this, hopefully, and check that out. The prophetic veracity test. Or the prophetic veracity dilemma, I think I named it. But either way, go check that out, because either way, even in that one, Muslims cannot affirm Jesus as a prophet. Go check that video out and see why.
Job at presenting it. I have been telling him forever to write a book about it, and I keep pushing him on that.
I think he is actually
he's going to do that soon. I believe he's working on it, actually.
There you go.
The responses that I saw, so here is how you can basically break it down. So the Islamic dilemma is that that according to the Quran, the Torah and the Gospel were revealed by Allah, that no one can change or corrupt Allah's words. This is what the Quran says. The Quran also says that Jews and Christians still possessed the valid Torah and the Gospel in Muhammad's time, and Muhammad himself was told to consult.
No, sorry, that was a bad spot to pause him there. I'm going to actually go back so I can listen to that again. But I just want to point something out here. In the Quran, it points out that none can change Allah's words, including past revelations, right? But what does later Islamic theology say? Because they realize the bind they're in, because the Quran affirms my Bible, right? So they realize the bind they're in, so they have to say, the Torah and the Gospel were lost. But that places them now in another dilemma. So you're saying Allah was unable to preserve his word? They were corrupted? Oh, no. That's not talking about the Torah and the Gospel. That's only talking about the Quran. Right, so you want me to believe in a God who couldn't keep his first 2 revelations, and he had to send the final revelation? If that's the case, what's the guarantee that the Quran is not going to be lost and we're going to need a 4th and final book? Is this a God that just has to keep on trying until he can get it to stick? No matter what way you slice this, Islam falls apart. So learn the Islamic dilemma. If you're a Christian, you want to engage with Muslims, and you think you don't know where to start, just learn the Islamic dilemma. It is very simple.
Jews and Christians still possessed the valid Torah and the Gospel in Muhammad's time, and Muhammad himself was told to consult the people of the book, the Jews and Christians, for confirmation. But the Torah and the Gospel, specifically the Gospel, directly contradict with Quran's core doctrines, such as the Trinity, the deity of Christ, the crucifixion, and the resurrection. So Muslims are left with 2 options. One is that the Torah and the Gospel are indeed preserved, in which case Islam is false because those texts directly contradict the Quran. Yep. Or number 2 is the Torah and the Gospel are not preserved, which would also lead to the conclusion that Islam is false because the Quran repeatedly affirms and protects and appeals those supposedly corrupted books. So no matter what you pick, Islam is refuted. That is the dilemma. They can't get out of it. And then there are, of course, the verses that we can cite and we quote. If you want to accept what the Quran actually says and want to say that the Torah and the Gospel have been preserved, as the Quran confirms in multiple verses, 547, 566, 568, and so on, 1094, then you have to believe what the Gospels teach. You have to believe in the divinity, the death and resurrection of Christ. You have to believe in Christianity.
Amen.
You have to affirm it. The response that you usually get from Muslims is that, Christians have misunderstood or misinterpreted the gospel from their Christian goggles and their Christian perspective.
So this is key. What AP is just about to say. This is why you then need to go and learn the prophetic veracity dilemma. Because Muslims cannot affirm Jesus in this situation either. Because either Jesus was clear and his disciples and his critics understood him and understood that he was claiming to be God, which is why they accused him of blasphemy and tried to put him to death. His disciples were willing to die for him. So if Jesus was clear, Islam is false because it misrepresents and it denies core tenets of Christ's life and mission. If Jesus was unclear, if he was unclear and his disciples misunderstood him, his enemies misunderstood him, then Jesus actually feels as a prophet. He feels as a Muslim prophet, meaning Islam cannot claim Jesus as a prophet, which they do. And Muslims cannot deny the prophethood of any prophet, right? So either way you slice it, either Jesus was clear, in which case Islam is false, or Jesus was unclear, in which case Allah is false. The only escape they can have is to say that Allah allowed for 600 years Christianity to become dominant, where people worship Jesus, where they sing praises to Jesus, they lived and died for Jesus, believing that he was God. If that's the case, Allah fails in protecting true religion. Allah fails in protecting his message because he allowed this to happen. There's no escape for this. Either Jesus was clear and Islam is false. Jesus was unclear, Islam is false. Allah allowed pagan worship to happen for over 600 years. Allah fails as a god. Either way you look at that, either way you slice it, Islam is false and it cannot hold up to scrutiny.
That falls very flat because the Gospels are very, very explicit and very clear. And the earliest Christians believed in the core teachings that they teach, which brought us the Christianity that we have. The Gospels directly tell us that Jesus rose from the dead, that he is God, and so on. Other responses that they give are something along the lines of what you just said, or what the person gave you as an answer. We are supposed to believe in the preserved, correct parts of it. But when you ask them what those parts are, they will say, well, those parts that are in line with Islam and do not contradict Islam. So it's circular reasoning. You're supposed to accept the Quran as authority to judge what is and is not authentic in the Gospels and the Torah. But wait a minute. Once again, we have the dilemma, because the Quran does say that those books as they exist in the time of Muhammad were preserved. So when you say that you only believe in parts of it, you are denying what the Quran says. Once again, you fail. There is just no real way out of it. And in all honesty, even if I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt and give a proper explanation in favor of Islam against the Islamic dilemma, I probably couldn't come up with one. We have actually tried it and we can't really respond to it because, as I said, it's an airtight, solid argument that really thoroughly refutes and debunks Islam. And it is currently so strong because we have been repeatedly talking about it. So many more people are talking about it every day. We see Muslims try to respond to it, and we have not seen a single good response from Muslims.
Well,
they have to run away from it.
I've heard some people try and say that the Quran at the time, the Bible at the time of the Quran's writing, so the 700s AD, It's been corrupted since then. But that's easily refuted by saying, like, we have entire Bibles from the 300s AD.
Exactly.
So we know what the Bible said in Muhammad's day. It's the same thing it says today. It hasn't changed. And I think also your point saying that the Quran says you can't abrogate, you can't change Allah's words. And if Allah's words are considered the Old and the New Testaments, then the argument from corruption doesn't work either. Then you're again violating the Quran. So this would seem to be a knockdown argument for the
It is. They can't
for Islam.
That's why whenever they come
but
in
yet
Christians' lives,
people still persist in belief anyway.
Because they know they can't answer.
It is a knockdown argument, and it is actually getting to such a level that just recently, just a week ago or a few days ago, the most popular Muslim debater, Mohammed Hijab, actually sat down to angrily respond to it and angrily try to explain it. And I would encourage those who are curious about his response to actually sit down and watch it.
Where would that be? Could we put it in the show notes? We'll find it.
It's a I'm not sure what it's called, but just recently, Inspiring Philosophy, Mike Jones, he and David together reviewed it and responded to it.
We'll find it. We'll put it in the show notes, friends. Because Mike does a good job at Inspiring Philosophy, and of course, so does David too at Apologetics Roadshow. YouTube channels, you can check them out as well.
Yep.
And look, we need to reach out to people in the second largest religion in the world. And only 1% of missionaries go to Muslim countries. I think part of the reason is they're afraid.
Yeah, there's a reason for that.
We need to reach out to people who are believing in God. They're believing in some kind of cause out there, but they're believing in the wrong God. And I want to talk a little bit about the historical reliability of the Quran itself, if we can, AP. What is the evidence there? Because we've had Jay Smith on. Jay takes a very skeptical view, as you know, of the historical reliability of the Quran. You take a less skeptical view of that, but there still are problems with it. In fact, if you go to even ChatGPT or any kind of AI and you type in,
don't go to ChatGPT.
Were there 30 Qurans in 1923 or 1924? Not 30 different translations, but 30 different versions. It will affirm, yes, there were, and the Egyptian government selected one to make it the standard in the school system there, and then the Saudi government...
Let me just say one thing about that, just because this falls into a territory that becomes very dangerous. On X, you currently have Muslims left, right, and centre asking Grok to prove their theology over and over and over. AI responds to the person that is given it the prompt. So if I, as a Christian, go to ChatGPT, Claude, Grok, and I say, give me evidence for whatever, if it's interacted with me before, it knows I'm a Christian, it knows my beliefs, it gives me favorable results. So whenever you see people online using ChatGPT or Grok or Claude or whatever AIs are out there, I don't know them all, but those are the three biggest anyway. It's going to give you a biased answer. So don't do that. Can AI be used as a tool? Sure, but don't use AI as your primary source, and don't go around and saying, oh, I used AI and I found out that, in 19 whatever date he said, there was 30 odd Qurans. You can find that information out there online from genuine sources. Cite the actual sources. Because the moment you say to a Muslim, oh, I asked ChatGPT and it said there was, 30 different Qurans, and it wasn't just, translations, or as they like to try and say, dialects, which again, it's not a dialect. They are different Qurans. Hatun Tash has done great material on that. Don't rely on AI, folks, because they can use it in their favor. We can use it in our favor. AI is just a bot that's going to respond to what it thinks you want to hear.
About 1985 said, yeah, we're going to use that version as the official Quran for all the world. Okay, this is 1,300 years after the Quran is supposed to have been written. Why are there so many different versions of the Quran running around?
So this is the funny thing. This is important specifically because of one issue which Muslims love to bring up, which is the perfect preservation and the uniqueness of the Quran. So Muslims make the claim that the Quran is the only scripture, the only book that has that was directly revealed by Allah, word for word, dictated, and that has ever since been completely and perfectly preserved. Now, the historicity of that tells us a different story, right? Yep. As you just said, we have different versions of the Quran. Now, those versions of the Quran don't have that much of a difference in the core message, but they do have differences in writings and wordings and letters and things like that. Muslims often try to explain it as simply different dialects and pronunciations, but that's not entirely true, because the different versions actually have different words used on multiple occasions that actually change the meaning of a passage. So the earliest Muslim interpreters did, for example, appeal to the Quran and said, according to this manuscript, it goes like this, and according to that manuscript, it goes like this. Both meanings could possibly be accepted. So that's how they use those different Quran versions. The thing is that it also goes back to how corrupted the supposed revelation of the Quran was in the very beginning. So those different Quran versions came into existence when the scribes and memorizers of Muhammad came together and began compiling the Quran from their memory and from their notes and creating different versions, of which many were actually initially burned. And it was unified, but it was still not unified. There were still many other versions left. But even going back from that, the first time that the Quran was indeed compiled into one book, into one scripture, was only after the death of Muhammad. Mm-hmm. There was a major battle during the so-called apostasy wars when many Muslims were leaving Islam after.
Now, I'm fairly sure AP is going to go on to explain this here, but initially, you had different, in Islam, you had different men that had different verses, different surahs memorized. Now, they thought, Muslims thought, God is not going to allow these guys to die, because otherwise they would lose the recited or the memorized verses. So what they did was they placed these guys on the front line of battle, thinking that Allah was going to protect them, because why would Allah allow these verses to be lost? Now, guess what happened? These men started to die on the battlefield, and they realized, oh goodness, we are going to lose verses because these guys have it memorized and these other guys don't. So they realized very quickly, okay, this isn't going to work. We need to bring them back off the front line of battle. Anyway, let's hear what IP has to say.
The death of Muhammad, which caused a major war. That war killed many Muslims who memorized and who wrote down parts of the Quran, which Muhammad revealed from his mouth, as supposedly the angel Gabriel spoke it through him directly from Allah. So in order to prevent the complete loss of the Quran by the death.
And remember, he's saying it here, but he hasn't really... He's explained it in detail elsewhere, but I think he's just given the gloss notes here. But the reason why he's about to say to preserve it is because, again, they put these men on the front line of battle, thinking surely Allah will not allow these men to die because they have these parts of the Quran memorized. It can't be lost. What happens? These men start to die.
Deaths of the memorizers and scribes, Muhammad's immediate followers came together and decided to compile it all into one book. And even in those narrations, you will find that the person given the task to compile it says, but the Prophet never ever commanded us to do such a thing. So the Prophet never even gave them the idea that it should be compiled into one book. He simply repeated revelations that he supposedly received from an angel.
A lot more with Apostate Prophet. Go to Apostate Prophet on YouTube. Also, you can check out his website, apostateprophet.com.
Same with Joseph.
And he has some amazing videos on his YouTube channel where you can go a lot deeper than what we're talking about here. We need to be better at reaching out to Muslims, friends, and Apostate Prophet can help. So check him out there. I'm Frank Turek. You're listening to I Don't Have Enough Faith. We haven't gotten into this yet, Ridvan, but I do want to ask you a little bit about when you did leave Islam. You became an atheist for a while. In fact, I was looking back at a text that David Wood sent me.
Over a decade,
this had to be 5, 6, 7 years ago. He said, this guy calls himself the apostate prophet and he wants to debate you. Hey, you had debated Michael Brown on Does God Exist, I guess. And somehow it never went anywhere. I asked David a question and get back to me. But how did you become an atheist? Why did you become an atheist? And then, I don't know if we'll get to it in this show. We'll have you on again to talk about how you became a Christian. Why did you become an atheist? What made you go, I think this whole thing is bunk. There's no God.
It's very funny that you bring this up. I completely forgot about that. But I was having a conversation with David, and I did suggest to him that I should debate you. So that did come up. Wow, it's very incredible. I completely forgot about that. But I'm glad that's not the case anymore. I'm a Christian today. Thank you.
Amen. That's great.
So how did I become an atheist? Well, we talked about Islam. So going back to the beginnings of Islam, I realized that Muhammad was simply making things up and telling people that he's receiving revelations from an angel that nobody ever witnessed, and delivering them to his surroundings, to his people, who would then somehow shape it and turn it into Quran verses and all that.
Muhammad at first thought he was possessed.
So I had to come to the conclusion that Muhammad was just somebody who called himself a prophet, but who actually had mental problems. There are many other narrations that support this, such as the ones that talk about him. Whenever he would receive a revelation from an angel, he would have what you could describe as seizures. For example, he would fall on the ground, he would sweat heavily, he would make loud snorting noises, and spend some time in that state, to then eventually come to himself and say, I just received a revelation from the angel Gabriel. So these are directly in the Muslim sources, by the way. In fact, that's directly how Sahih Bukhari, the number one most reliable book on the narrations about Muhammad's life, starts. It describes how he used to receive his revelations. It sounds a little bit weird, doesn't it?
Didn't he used to think that he was being possessed by demons, by jinn? They're called jinn in Islam.
Yep,
that's true. And it actually led him to want to end his own life. So,
and his wife Khadijah talked him out of it and said, "You're getting revelation from the same source as Moses."
Yes, precisely. That's true. That's true.
So Muhammad early on thought that his revelations were from the dark side, and then
he did indeed.
Then he said no. Well, his wife said no. You're getting it from Moses, or from the same source as Moses.
And then we have,
and isn't it interesting? The world's second largest religion does not have any miraculous confirmation that anyone else could confirm.
It doesn't.
It's similar to Mormonism. In fact, people have made the case that Mormonism is just very much like Islam without the violence, because there's just one guy that gets a new revelation, and he can have many wives as well, but he's not as violent, quite obviously. And he's saying that the Bible is corrupt and he has the new revelation. It's very similar in that regard.
It's almost
of course,
like the Apostle
Islam is much larger than Mormonism.
An angel,
it's been around a lot longer.
An angel.
But how do Muslims respond when you say, well, Muhammad really thought he was being possessed by demons?
They don't really respond. I mean, they just explain that this is how he received his revelations. This is what Allah decided. But of course, you can say that this logically disqualifies and refutes him as a prophet. But you could point out how odd it is that apparently Allah chooses to deliver his revelations to him in that way. That he gives him immense pain and suffering, as Muhammad himself describes it. That he throws him on the ground, makes people get a little bit scared of him, and all that. And eventually we learn that this is apparently a revelation from Allah. So finding out these things, and then also the miracle about the moon splitting, for example, which was touted as this big miracle that everybody witnessed. It turns out that that was probably invented a few centuries after Muhammad's death, and nobody ever witnessed it. Had the moon split in two in Muhammad's lifetime in the 7th century in Arabia, it would have been witnessed by multiple other civilizations that were far advanced, and they would have taken note of it. Nobody noticed it. So anyway, these revelations led me to eventually end up leaving Islam, questioning religion in general, thinking that Muhammad was just a self-proclaimed prophet who sold something to the world. And I did sarcastically come up with the idea of just saying, I can do that too, but I can actually have a good message, so I'll just call myself a prophet as well. And so the apostate prophet, and then talk about how bad Islam actually is and all that. During that time, I did I did wrestle a lot with the idea of God. It's fine to say wrestling with God. But at that time, my conclusion, without looking too deeply into the Bible, into Judaism and Christianity, aside from figuring out the contradictions between the Bible and the Quran, my conclusion was at that time, I think all of it is a lie. We were just deceived. We were just being deceived. Nothing is, there is no God. If there was a God, then it would be proven true. But the best explanation that we have is that there is no God. And I go with the best explanation, not with,
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. You said it's difficult to hear me. Oh dear, that's not too good. A few others did say that they could hear me. So I don't know. I will try and turn up my mic a little bit more. I may just need some light here. Bear with me. Okay. Let's see how that goes. We're gonna continue doing it the way we're doing it just for now, because normally when I have to stop and start this thing, the streams go on forever because it's too much to react to. But good afternoon, hope you're well. And let's get back to the stream and see.
The more difficult, or the least supported
let me know how I
explanation and
sound
all
now.
that. So these basic new atheist thoughts, also going with Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris and all the others, and basically getting my confirmation bias from them, led me to become an atheist. It was an interesting path to go down after freeing myself from the shackles of Islam.
Livian said, sounds good.
How long was that period, the atheism period?
It was actually very long. So it was like almost 10 years long or so.
There we go. I thought it was 10
at
years.
The beginning and at the very end or so, I would have described myself more as an agnostic, but I would have simply chosen the title agnostic atheist. But still, it was nearly 10 years. So for nearly 10 years, I was an atheist.
Perfect. Glad to hear
for
it.
the longest time,
there's just
I did sympathize with Christianity,
the IP here.
and even did say in the past, I wish it was true. So this is something that I did say many years ago, because I always loved it and had respect for it, but I could not believe it. I thought that God is simply something that people made up to explain the natural world around them and the things that happen in life, and because they can't deal with the fact that one day everybody dies and it all just stops.
Which is common
existing.
whenever you talk to atheists.
I thought
not every atheist.
The only explanation we have is simply that it is what it is. There is no inherent meaning. There is no inherent creator. There is no inherent. There is no purpose to anything. We all happen to accidentally live on this planet in this empty universe, and one day we will die and all of this will be gone, and that's just how it is. And I thought I could make peace with that. Yeah, I thought I could make peace with that and find meaning in that with existentialist philosophy and absurdist philosophy and all that. But I really tricked myself, because whenever I pondered more deeply about it, and whenever I was less motivated, I found how I'm simply providing meaning for myself because I'm so terrified of the fact that there is actually no meaning at all, and all is for nothing. And there is really no reason why I should be alive. That was my thought. But still, I wanted to stick to my atheism until eventually I couldn't do that any longer.
And you began to investigate Christianity at that point?
Yeah. I thought I knew a lot about Christianity, but as I was exploring Christianity, I guess we can go into more detail on that later on. As I was exploring Christianity, I realized that I was actually exploring Judaism at first, then Christianity. But as I was exploring it, I realized that I don't know anything about it. And I began going into the early theology and the early philosophical explanations of Christianity, and found them incredibly profound. And it was when I read the Epistle to the Romans that I realized what a fantastic set of writings the New Testament actually is, and how impactful and meaningful it is. I was always fascinated with Ecclesiastes of the Old Testament, but reading the Gospels and encountering their message for the first time gave me a big fascination with Christianity. At some point, I thought that I can simply believe that there is nothing, that there is no God, but I can still just hold that Jesus was a very good moral character and a great teacher and a fantastic figure, and everybody should be more like Jesus. I mean, as an atheist, I did say that I wish everybody was more like Jesus and less like Muhammad. But back then, this was just about what kind of a teacher and moral figure Jesus was. And it's funny because later on, as I was exploring Christianity, I read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis for the first time, and that's where I then encounter his whole argument that it's actually foolish to say that that he's merely a good moral teacher, but not God, because if he was indeed a good moral teacher, he wouldn't be making the claims that he made, and all that. So I thought, wow, that's
if you're
pretty incredible. It's kind of like a
honest,
slap in my face when I'm trying to be nice to Jesus.
It's very clear that he came.
When did the message of grace? When did you comprehend that? When did that come through? That you weren't bound to this slavish idea that your good deeds needed to outweigh your bad. When did that happen? We only got about 30 seconds, and we'll pick it up in the next show. But when did that happen? How did that come about?
Quite recently. I only became a Christian very, very recently. In fact, it was only at the beginning of this year that I started calling myself a Christian. It was a very difficult idea to embrace after Islam, which told me basically that I'm an animal that is being brutally trained by Allah, who is constantly breathing down my neck and waiting to reward me or to punish me. Then realizing what kind of a wonderful, humane message, what kind of a human message the gospel actually has, came only very, very recently.
Well, we're going to unpack that on the next program with Apostate Prophet, ladies and gentlemen. What an interesting man.
Well, there you go, folks. There is the interview. Let me go ahead and switch the scene so we can come back to this. Well, I actually really enjoyed that. I understand Frank is running a radio show, so there's going to be those breaks on it with the musical advertisement. Again, YouTube, I reacted to this under fair usage. Do not strike me. I will be appealing it if you do. But folks, that was really interesting. I enjoyed that. I have been watching David Wood, AP, for a number of years, and AP is someone I have been praying for a number of years. So it does my heart good to see the fact that he has adopted Christianity, that he believes in the Lord and realizes that he has been purchased by the Lord Jesus Christ. So I'm not going to continue on too much longer, folks. I see a good number of you are watching, especially on X. If anybody wants to say anything, now's your time. Otherwise, I am going to cut out for this stream, and I will maybe be back. No, not actually tomorrow. We may be back tomorrow. We normally used to stream Monday, Wednesday, and Sunday, but streaming times over this last number of months have been incredibly inconsistent due to me and the co-hosts having different things to do, different plans, different projects we've been working on. But we're going to try and get back to a more consistent streaming time soon. We're going to have a call-in show very shortly for Muslim callers, especially. We want to have conversations with them. And folks, we invite you to come check out what we're doing. We are, Gabe and I have both got our own websites. You can find him at trinityapologetics.com. You can find me at thelaymanapologist.com. You can check us out on all our social medias. All the main ones, you'll find us there. Just search our names. Now, Gabe obviously wasn't in this stream, but he normally is my co-host. We do have another co-host, but he has been absent for at least a couple of months now. He's got a lot going on, so maybe he'll be back in the future. However, we have got a lot of work that we're currently doing. I am currently writing another book, which has taken a lot of time. If you do want to check out my book, you can find it on Amazon. It's a little devotional on the first book of Psalms, and showing how they all point towards Christ. You can check that out on Amazon. Just type in The Layman Apologist, Songs of Heaven's King, and you'll find it. That's a way that you can help support me in the channel. If you do want to support the channel and the work that we're doing, because YouTube, we're going to be stepping into YouTube more regularly in the future. YouTube has been a bit of a side gig for me and just something I enjoy doing, but we're going to try and do a lot more streams in the future. We're going to be producing a lot more content. We're going to have interviews. We're going to have debates. But if you want to help support that work, there is a QR code at the bottom left hand of your screen, or there right beside it you can also see a link that you can type into your browser as well. That is a way that you can give to the channel. It can be a one-time gift, or you can become a monthly member where you will get access to perks. The reason why we're operating with Buy Me a Coffee for now is we have recently had a massive boost in subs thanks to GodLogic, so thanks again to that, brother. But we are not yet monetized. We do not yet have access to super chats or anything else. But even then, Buy Me a Coffee is still one of the best ways that you can give to us, because we actually get to keep everything that you give. Everything that we do make doesn't go to us personally. It gets poured back into the channel. It gets poured back into research for the materials that we're producing. Gabe and I also have a website that is coming out very shortly that will show you how to witness to Muslims. It's going to be a very fun, very interactive website, so we're looking forward to that. We've already hinted at it in previous streams, but that will be something we're working on in the future. I currently have a group of writers who are writing for me over on Substack, which is great because it frees my time up to do a lot more of this stuff. So you will see more of us in the future. And we're looking forward to producing good Christian apologetics for you guys, and we hope it blesses you. So, all that being said, thank you very much for watching, folks. I am going to hop on out. Please do spread the word, like the stream. It really, really does help. Comment after the video has ended, because it really does help the algorithm push the video. It helps get our channel out there. So, do all that for me. I would be immensely grateful if you would. Thank you very, very much for watching. And again, if you do want to give, the QR code is just down there. So thank you very much, folks. God bless.